Hello, investigators, and welcome to Until the End of Time. My name is Veronica. This is the FAQ 2.0 analysis video. Last night, FAQ released the long-awaited FAQ 2.0, which came paired with a new taboo list. So in this video, I'm going to be covering the changes, talking about what any of this means. Before I get into the bulk of that, I do just want to quickly say thank you to everybody who subscribed to my channel. I recently crossed 500 subscribers, and I can only assume that the Scarlet Key previous season did a lot to help me there. So thank you to everybody who subscribed. It means a lot to me. I do this as a part of my hobby because I enjoy doing this, but it's still nice to know that people appreciate my videos and like it enough to stick around. I definitely hope that you'll stick around even longer because in addition to a new preview season recap, which is of course coming soon, I also have something very excited that I'm going to be recording tonight that I hope will make for a fun new series. So stay tuned, there's a lot more coming on this channel. Now, before we get into the actual taboo list, we're also going to be talking about the errata and some rules clarifications. Now, importantly, taboo list is optional, will remain optional and should always be seen as optional. However, errata, not so much. The intention is for this errata to apply to everybody. Now, if you don't, then nobody's going to send the Arkham Police down to your home, but it's worth saying that the game is kind of designed around the idea that everybody uses the errata, but not everybody uses the taboo list. So, that being said, most of the changes in the errata are very minor and mostly just clarifications. The first example here is Storm of Spirits and Mark 1 grenades. There was a bit of confusion. What happens if you use Storm of Spirits or especially Mark 1 grenades at a location other than your own? Because as written, the ability would deal damage to the location you're standing in. So if you marksmanship a grenade over to an adjacent location, you would still deal damage to everybody at your location. This has now been fixed, and the fight abilities now read at the attacked enemy's location instead of at your location. Makes a lot of sense, very straightforward, and actually kind of a nice adjustment to the grenades. This makes marksmanship a lot more appealing because you can now toss those into locations with enemies without worrying about hitting the friend standing next to you. Next up, we have a very small change to stick to the plan. The card now has you attach the events face down. Now, you might even wonder if this ever mattered, and honestly, you probably played this incorrectly for a long time, but never really noticed because it's one of those things that just doesn't make any sense to do it the way that's actually like rules wise. But basically, the way that it worked is that events that are attached face up are active. In fact, any card that is attached face up is generally considered active, and face down is when cards are inactive. So if you have something like the Lady Inevitable, which at the end of your Mythos phase you have to spend 2 resources or discard it, you would technically have to spend those resources while it was attached to stick to the plan. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? So it's been around that the cards are now inactive and then you stick to the plan. That just makes a lot of sense. Next up, a small but kind of meaningful change to a couple of bonded enabling cards. So Hallowed Mirror level 0, Occult Lexicon level 0, and Miss Doyle now all have their forced effect changes so that instead of removing the cards from the game when the asset leaves play, they instead get set back aside. So most of the time this isn't gonna matter. And again, that's something you see with a lot of the errata is that it doesn't really matter for the main use case of the card. But something that a lot of people kind of complained about is that if you have a Hallowed Mirror, say, or a Lexicon lose or leave play because maybe you got hit by Crypt Chill or something else made you discard cards, those soothing melodies now became inaccessible because they were removed from the game, they weren't set aside. So even if you had some way to recur the item, you had no way of getting the spells back because they were removed from the game. This now changes that, so if your Hallowed Mirror gets destroyed, you can recur it, maybe with the new salvage card, I'm just saying, and then you can play it again and get the events again, which is nice. It's just a little quality of life improvement. It isn't gonna majorly change the cards. Worth noting for both of these that the level 3 version found in Return to the Circle of Dun already works differently, where it doesn't remove the cards from your deck at all. As for Miss Doyle, I think this has potential for a little bit more shenanigans because there are ways of removing allies from the game to do or to bounce them back to hand with calling in favors to kind of do shenanigans. So you could maybe do that to like reset which cat you start the game with. But I think that's just really convoluted and shenanigans. The main thing here is if you just get a random treachery that like kills one of your allies, it's nice that it doesn't just lock you out of these creatures for the rest of the game. And this is a card that I think Charlie really likes because he has those 1/1/1/1 stat lines, and this lets him do, a lot while also using Miss Doyle as an unexpected courage. Moving on to Geared Up, this is a errata that I think you might have known was coming because it's one that got posted in the. I think it got somebody asked it via email and got answered a bit before this FAQ actually came out. Basically, all that changes is that when your first turn in the game begins, play one at a time those items. So they're no longer like this weird mash of everything going down together. We now know they are supposed to be played one at a time, which mostly matters for Backpack and Schaffner's Catalog. I think there's like barely any other interaction that I can think of that might matter, but basically what this means is that any of those after enters play or the uses will be in play before you play your next card. So you can now chain backpacks, you can use whatever you find with backpack, you can play those with Geared Up, and you can use Catalog to pay for it. I actually really like this. I've already played a deck using this because we knew this errata was coming. It was a Parallel Daisy deck, because Parallel Daisy's deck building include level 0 Guardian cards. And I think I got up to 9 assets turn 1 multiple times, because you get like multiple backpacks. Those backpacks find you the catalogs. You get Daisy's Tote Bag for those extra hand slots. You get a bunch of tomes in play. It's a fun deck. I think Geared Up has definitely, gone up for me with this thing. I still think hilariously it's like the worst for Guardians because they just want to play their big gun and be done, and they want to play a big ally. Whereas for someone like Seeker or maybe Survivor, there's a lot more smaller allies you might want to play. Still, it's a fun card and worth having an eye out on. Okay, so next up we have a Limbo Space. Um, this is not really a rules change. It's a clarification on what happens in the time between when you play an event and when it goes into the discard pile. There's never going to be any game effects or like card effects that care about Limbo Space. The thing that it is just a clarification, because what I think we've all done is like when you commit cards to a skill test, you just put those cards on the table, and then at the end of the test, they go into the discard pile. And we all know that during the test, those cards aren't in our hands, but they're also not in our discard pile, but they're also technically not like in play ish. This errata changes, or not errata, sorry, this FAQ introduces a concept called Limbo Space, which is basically where those cards are while they're resolving. And then it, more importantly, gives very clear timing on when those cards are supposed to leave that space. I think that this is a great thing to have it in the FAQ because you don't need to know about it for 99% of the games you'll play. And if it matters, just look it up. Like, this is the main thing. It's like I've posted the text here, but the more important thing is just know that it exists so that if you're ever in a situation where this might matter, you can Control F the FAQ document and just find wherever that's listed. I don't think you need to know this by hand. Next up, we have another like small change. This one has potential some ramifications, but it's a skull shifting slots. So there are a couple of cards that give you additional slots or that give you like let you have assets that don't take up any slots. And there were some shenanigans possible where, by a very literal reading, you are allowed to choose at any point in time how many of those slots were actually occupied. So, for example, if you had the Detective Colts, which are Joe's signature cards, you could have up to 2 tool assets not take up any hand slots. So, if you have a flashlight that was completely empty and out of supplies, and you had some way of recurring it, you could go, well, I have now decided that this flashlight does in fact take up a hand slot, and therefore it's immediately discarded because I'm over my hand slots, and now I'm going to recur it with William Webb. This new FAQ makes that no longer possible. When a quantity or contents of your slots changes, you are allowed to decide which assets are taking up which slots, but you are not allowed to arbitrarily decide how many slots something is taking up, which I think is just a good change, right? It's just basically shutting down some shenanigans. If you're not doing any of those shenanigans, this is not going to matter. This one, however, I think is going to matter a bit more, and that is the rule about searching during setup. So there's a lot of scenario effects as well as stick to the plan, which can trigger searches during your setup, so before opening hand usually. And there was a problem where by using effects like Astounding Revelation, other research effects, as well as Mandy's weakness, those could interact with those searches in very counterintuitive ways and create real problems. So the fix now is just you cannot do that. Any effect that would trigger during those searches no longer triggers, which is nice for not having Mandy's weakness break the game, but it does kind of act as a pseudo nerf to stick to the plan for Guardians who are using it to get Astounding Revelation and kind of treat it as another day, another dollar, which is that they start their game with 2 additional resources. I've seen some criticism of this. I'm of the opinion that this is a good change for the health of the game in general. I do agree that it was kind of a neat trick that you could do with like Zoe, and I think there were a couple other, like Roland could take it. And it's kind of a shame that this is gone, but on the other hand, it's probably fine. We'll get through it. There's a bunch more changes and mostly clarifications, looking at versus searches versus finding, drawing, adding to hands, etc., etc. If any of this sounds interesting to you, go look up the FAQ yourself. I don't think there's really a point in me listing all of this out because for the most part, it's only clarifying what these terms mean. They're not actually changes in any meaningful way. They're just clarifications. There are also a few changes that are specific to certain cards or even clarifications in this sense. So for forced learning, it's been ruled that if you draw a weakness with forced learning, you're not allowed to discard it before resolving its revelation effect. So if you draw a weakness and a non-weakness card, you are forced to discard the non-weakness card and then resolve the weakness. And if you draw 2 weakness cards, you have to keep both. That's pretty straightforward and pretty clear, and glad to have that confirmed in the rules how forced learning is supposed to work. It's been confirmed that signature cards do not have a level, so cards like Shrine of the Moire, who can get back a certain amount of level cards, cannot get back signature cards. Very straightforward, very clear, just doesn't work. And finally, there's been a quick clarification on how Silas Marsh is supposed to interact with Daring. So Daring is a skill card that you commit to a test. During that test, the enemy gains Retaliate and Alert, and after the test ends, draw 1 card. Now, it's a bit shenanigansy, but there was a reading where, because of what's called a delayed effect or continual effect, I think, Daring was supposed to still draw you a card even if you pulled it back using Silas's ability. That's no longer the case, but the Retaliate and the Alert still stay even if you pull it back to hand. So be careful because that part still sticks. It's just the card draw that gets pulled back to hand. So if you pull back to hand, you do not get to draw a card, but the enemy keeps the Retaliate and Alert. All right, that's everything for the errata, the FAQ, the clarifications. Now we're moving on to the taboo list. Now I want to stress up front right away, taboo is optional. Taboo has always been optional, taboo will stay optional. It is designed to make the game more fun, to encourage deck diversity, to kind of like make the game more interesting. It is not designed to be a balancing patch in the strictest sense. It's supposed to balance in the sense that if you're only ever playing the strongest stuff, the game gets boring, but it's not meant to be, let's just nerf the most powerful cards in the game. It's let's make sure all the cards in the game are interesting and worth including and thinking about. Okay, so with that out of the way, and right, if you don't want to play with Taboo, you are totally valid for not playing with Taboo. And if you just want to play with all the positive taboos and leave all the nerfs at the side, power to you. Maxine has said that this is okay. She literally said last night, if players want to ignore these 2 taboos, they can go ahead and do that, and I'm okay with that. So please play the game in a way that you have fun with it. The taboo list exists as a way for the community to kind of agree on what the state of the game is. A lot of players use it, but if you don't use it, that's fine. All right, I'll get off my soapbox now. There are 3 categories of taboo: chained, mutated, and forbidden. Chained/unchained changes the amount of XP a card costs. Mutated changes the text of the card in some way, and forbidden is just cannot be included. There are no changes to forbidden cards in this taboo list, so we don't have to worry about that. And let's get going with all of the cards that have changed. So first up, let's talk about the one that actually doesn't appear on the list, because it's off the list now. It's Machete. So a core set classic, Machete is a very efficient, very reliable weapon for the Guardian faction. It was on the original Taboo list back in the Circle Undone at 2 XP. It's been lowered to 1 XP for a while now, and it's now finally off. Taboo is, or Machete is free now. It can walk away from the shackles of the Taboo list and live a free life. And I actually think that this is totally fine. When Machete originally went on the Taboo list, it was the weapon of choice for just about anybody in the game that could take it, because we were in the Circle Undone, and the card pool was much smaller than this now. I think the card pool has about doubled in the meantime. There are so many more efficient weapons now, even at level 0, that I don't think Machete is going to automatically overshadow everybody. Something like the Runic Axe from the upcoming Scarlet Keys expansion already feels like it is a worthy competitor in many ways, and there are probably more cards still to come. Machete will probably remain a very strong option at level 0, might be one of the best, if not just the best, but that's okay. It's fine if it's the best, as long as it doesn't stop other cards from getting played totally. And I think we have reached the point where that's the case, right? There are enough campaigns where the fact that you can only have one enemy engaged to get the bonus damage is a drawback. There are enough campaigns where wanting to have a relic weapon is very important. Machete has drawbacks, and when the card was initially tabooed, I think those drawbacks weren't getting, like, those were not a problem, but nowadays there is enough reasons to look at other cards that I think it will be fine. The game will, I think this is a good change for the game. Next up, we have a series of multiple changes to Mystic cards relating to symbol tokens. So as a general statement, the wording of these cards has changed so that instead of saying Skull, Cultist, Tablet, or Elder Thing, it now just says symbol token. Now, a couple of these are slightly more specific than that, but the gist of it is that they now also interact with Blessed tokens, Curse tokens, and Frost tokens, plus any other potential tokens we might see in future campaigns. And I think this is a great change because Bless and Curse feel like they kind of happened and then kind of faded away. There wasn't enough interaction with those cards possible. And this is making a whole bunch of old cards interact with Bless and Curse in whole new ways, which is super exciting. Starting off, we have some economy options. Jewel of Areolus. After a symbol token is revealed during a skill test location, exhaust it to draw a card or gain 2 resources. And for Voice of Ra, you gain a resource, reveal 3 random tokens. For every symbol token revealed this way, gain an additional 2 resources. These are just straight up buffs across the board. One of the most important things, I think, is just Voice of Ra. When it came out, it was kind of in a very awkward timing because everybody was just about to get into Innsmouth and do all kinds of Bless and Curse things. And Bless and Curse in the bag with the original Voice of Ra was terrible because if you revealed them, you weren't even revealing another token, so you just lose out on money. Now, adding Bless and Curse actually makes Voice of Ra give you more money, and it gives you a lot of economy. And the same with Frost tokens. If you're just playing a random campaign, Edge of the Earth campaign, having the ability to trigger off those Frost tokens make these cards better. And I really like that. I really just enjoy that these cards that honestly have been a little under the curve are now getting a nice boost. So speaking of getting a boost, this next card is going to get wild. So imagine for a moment we're playing a game of the Gathering and our tablet token is a -2 if there's a ghoul enemy location, yada yada. And we draw Curse, 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 Tablet. This is a -8. I'm sure there's some expert players in the game who look at -8 and go, yeah, sure, whatever. But for most of you, I think -8 sounds like the kind of result that's going to ruin any skill test, no matter how high up you were. So what if I told you that for 1 resource and with 1 card, we could halve the effectiveness of this thing? Ritual Candles, after you reveal a symbol token, during a skill test you're performing, you get +1 skill value for this test. Now, something that's very crucial for Ritual Candles, which we know from FAQs from Olive McBride, is that there's no limit to the number of times it can trigger during a single skill test. And because the curse tokens are revealed sequentially, you can trigger this ability for every curse token you reveal. Ritual Candles now turns any curse token you reveal into a -1 instead of a -2. That's massive. And in fact, it could get wilder because it's a hand slot card. It's not unique. If you have 2 of these, any curse you reveal is essentially negated. It's just 0. And that's wild. I don't know if it's going to be worth building your deck around getting a whole bunch of curse tokens in the bag and then using Ritual Candles to negate those, but I definitely think that this little sleeper from the Dunwich Legacy expansion is going to be a lot more exciting now and worth including. And I'm even thinking about like using Bob to sell it to other people because it's an item. There's a lot here, and just it's very niche, obviously. It's like you're taking up a hand slot. It's not doing anything on most tests, but the ability to make decks that don't like curse tokens just half the effectiveness of any curse tokens you reveal for only one cost, 0 XP, seems great. Now, the curse token is, I think, the big one here because you don't want to lose a lot of tests to curse tokens. Doing it on blast tokens is slightly less relevant because turning a +2 into a +3 doesn't do that much, but there is actually a bit of a combo here possible if you combine it with the Guardian Sacred Covenant, which lets you return any number of blast tokens revealed during a test to the Chaos bag, but you have to ignore the modifiers. The Ritual Candles doesn't actually change the modifier of the token, it just gives you +1 skill value. So any blessed tokens that you revealed are still considered revealed, and you can return all those tokens to the bag, not having to remove them from the bag, and still get a +1. I think this is a niche interaction, but I think all of these are niche interactions, and I kind of like it. I kind of love how many options there are now possible for Ritual Candles, and I hope we'll be seeing some Ritual Candle decks soon. Moving on to the other cards, we have a mutation on Dark Prophecy. It changes it so that it's no longer looking for those 5 specific tokens, but it's looking for any non-Elder Sign Chaos token. Whenever you would reveal a token, you revealed 5 tokens instead of 1. I really like this. I think that, again, it was kind of a problem where if you had extra blesses and curses in the bag, it would make the effect much less reliable because maybe you would reveal no specific tokens and you'd luck out, but if you drew like an autofail and 2 blesses, you were feeling really bad. And this makes it so much better. Importantly, I think this is a very good bless strategy now. If you have Blessing of Isis in play, after you reveal your first bless token, you can use Dark Prophecy to try and fish for that second bless token and get that Elder Sign effect. I really like this as a small way of making a card that I personally really love, because I think Dark Prophecy is great, but it just wasn't always worth playing. You just make it a little bit better, and it finds its home in Bless and Curse strategies, hopefully. Counterspell is also receiving a buff which lets it cancel any non-autofill Chaos token during a skill test at your location. It does not reveal any new tokens, which is pretty sweet. I think using this for Bless or Curse is rarely going to be super great. Maybe in a Curse deck I could see you going, well, I've revealed 2 Curse tokens, so I'm at -4. If I reveal another curse token, I can cancel that token so that I stay at -4 and can pass the test. But generally, if you have curse tokens in the back, you have effects that care about revealing those tokens. And obviously you don't want to cancel your blessed tokens with this expensive event. The one that I think matters the most for Counterspell is the Frost token from Edge of the Earth, because in case you're not familiar, the first Frost token is a -1 reveal another token, but the second Frost token you reveal is an automatic failure. This way, you can draw 1 Frost token, you're totally fine. If you reveal a second Frost token, you counterspell that token, and now you've essentially revealed a -1. That seems fine. I really like this, giving just a little bit more utility to a pretty, kind of niche but fun card. Yeah, just happy with this. There are also a couple of other changes related to Bless and Curse. Both Signum Crucis and Rite of Equilibrium got unchanged, costing 2 XP less, which is very relevant for Signum Crucis because it makes it cost 0 XP. So you can start the campaign with this card in your deck. I think this card is quite strong, actually. Like, my experience with this card is that I wasn't really unhappy to pay 2 XP for it, so I'm kind of surprised to see this big buff to it, but I'm not complaining, right? I'm going to put this in as many Survivor decks as I can fit it in, and keep in mind that for Kelvin, he has base stats 0 and everything. This is a good way to get some extra blesses in the bag. Rite of Equilibrium with the big 5 XP Mystic card that could add a whole bunch of Blessing Curse tokens in the bag in one go, but in practice most people weren't really willing to shell out 5 XP. I hope that for 3 XP the card feels a little bit more affordable and more people will play it, because it's a neat effect, and I honestly would like to see it played more. And then finally, Flute of the Outer Gods is a Pipe Piper ability that lets you store curse tokens on the flute to control the movement and attacks from enemies. This card was exceptional, and as far as we can tell from the FAQ article, that's because there were some pretty wild playtesting games, but as it turns out, very few people were willing to pay 8 XP for this card. And so it's been mutated, but it's really just an XP reduction because it's no longer exceptional, but instead just limit 1 per deck. I think this is a fine change. I still don't know how many people will play it for 4 XP if I'm honest, but at least it's doing a lot more than it did before. And it's worth saying that we've seen a couple of Scarlet Keys cards that care about like manipulating enemies and using enemies for other goals with the power word. So maybe this will fit into a deck whose strategy is not to kill enemies, instead manipulate them into fighting each other. That would be kind of cool. If nothing else, making it 4 XP less is probably going to improve its chances. Next we have some changes to some secret cards. The Strange Solution Acidic Ichor goes from dealing +2 damage to +1 damage. And the Prophecia Profana changes so that it no longer cancels all attacks opportunity, only the first one each turn. I think these are both pretty sensible changes. Strange Solution has always felt like it was way too strong, dealing 3 damage per use. I know that a lot of people are complaining about only getting 3 uses, but it's also 1 resource. This card was so cheap, didn't take up any slots, and let you fight oftentimes better than the Guardian without having any drawbacks for slots or anything. Making it 2 damage changes it from a monster slayer into kind of a sidearm. If you're panicking, if you need to get rid of something, this will do the job, but it isn't going to just invalidate the Guardian's lightning gun anymore. I think this is a good change. I'm honestly surprised that it happened now out of all time, because like, why wasn't it earlier? But I'm happy with it, and I think it's a good change. The Prophecia Profana change I think is actually pretty minor, because I think the most powerful uses of this card are the stat boost and the teleport. But on the other hand, I also feel that this card is actually quite balanced, and so I'm not really worried about a small nerf, because I don't think it really needed a nerf in the first place, and if it did, it only needed a small one. So I'm perfectly fine with this. I think this is a sensible change if they were worried about the power level of this card. A couple more changes to Edge of the Earth cards. Black Market got mutated to be max once per round. I think this is perfect. There were a bunch of combo decks with Black Markets that could potentially win the game on turn 1, which is super lame. Trust me, it's just like, well, whatever. The point being that they usually relied on using Black Market to find other Black Markets so that you could play basically everybody's deck turn 1. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but that is what it came down on. It's like everybody's just playing way too many Black Markets, and this just shuts that down really elegantly without taking away what makes Black Market so interesting, which is that you can divide the assets and the cards that you find among the investigators. You just can't do so for, 15 cards on turn 1. You just have to, do that over 3 turns. Then there's the Eon Chart Changes. The change makes it that it only gives basic actions instead of any action of those types. So it still has to be a move, evade, or investigate, but it is now a basic move, a basic evade, or a basic investigate. This is curious. So I know that Eon Charts are a very powerful card, and I've seen some Eon Chart builds that were absolutely, well, I wouldn't call them broken, but very strong. But I don't know if this is the direction I would have gone to with this mutation, because it doesn't really limit the effectiveness of these decks that much. I mean, not being able to use lockpicks with these is kind of nice, because it prevents scavenging from being as reliable. You have to spend actual actions using your lockpicks as Bob now. And likewise, not using Fingerprint Kit reduces the number of clues you can get with these bonus investigates. But I still think this card is going to be very strong. Maybe that's just fine. Maybe Eon Chart isn't broken. I don't think it, because that's the thing, right? I don't think Eon Chart was ever broken. And so I'm wondering if this mutation was necessary. But if it was, then I wonder if it's doing enough, which is a bit of a weird spot to be in. But I think that in general, I'm just kind of okay with this mutation. Just, yeah, it's there. It's not hurting anybody. So speaking of hurting people, the Cyclopean Hammer. Let's get through to this one, because it's the one we all came to see. So this 5 XP, 5 cost asset from the Edge of the Earth is widely, I think, acknowledged to be one of the most broken weapons in the game, because it repeatedly lets you do way too much damage and has a way too high skill value. The mutation makes it exhaust to get the parenthesis effect, so you have to exhaust to deal the +2 damage and move. I'm not convinced this is enough of a drawback. but I'm acknowledging that it's at least moving in the right direction. It goes from 9 damage per round to 7 damage per round, which is a good change. The problem is that until you get to enemies that have more than 5 health, the change really doesn't matter that much, because the first enemy you hit is probably going to take 3 damage, and then the second hit is going to do 2 damage, which in most cases kills almost every enemy in the game anyway, and the ones that it doesn't kill, you can push away or whatever. The fact that it's such a high combat value because you get to add your willpower, and the fact that it doesn't take up arcane slots for mystic users means that this still feels incredibly competent compared to something like Shriveling, which not only takes up an arcane slot and only tests your willpower plus 3, I want to say. It also has a drawback where if you reveal a symbol token, you get horror. Cyclopean Hammer has none of these drawbacks, and I'm honestly not super happy with that. I think I would have pushed this mutation much further and I would have nerfed it much harder. But on the other hand, I also haven't played Cyclopean Hammer in ages, and I'm kind of okay that the people who are excited to play the card still get to play the card and still get to use the aspects I think they're excited about. So we'll have to see how it shakes out. I could see them revisiting this one and hitting it a little harder, but I think I'm okay with where it sits. The one that I'm really disappointed by is Renfield. Renfield got changed to be +3 experience, so now costs 3 XP to include in your deck. And the justification given was that the Scarlet Key cards that care about Doom are going to make him way too strong, and so he needed to be nerfed. I don't know. I think 3 XP might as well just be forbidden. I don't think anybody that I've talked to is like, oh yeah, I'll still play him at +3 XP. And I haven't seen any Scarlet Keys cards yet that make me go, oh yeah, he needed the nerf. Now, granted, of course, we haven't seen most of the Scarlet Keys yet, right? Like, it might feel like we have seen so many cards because we have, but I think we still have like over 2/3 of the box unrevealed. So there's a lot of cards left to see. That being said, this is a big hit. And I already felt that Doom Control or Doom Play in Mystic was already a very niche archetype that a lot of players were shying away from because of the high risk involved. And so taking out what is one of the like signature signpost cards in such a fashion is not great. I don't think it helps encourage deck diversity. I think it just makes Mystics less diverse because Renfield, alongside being a Doom card, also was the only level 0 ally that gave a willpower boost. And so for someone like Jim or Luke, who maybe wants to go very willpower, the fact that they have 4 base willpower now hurts even more. I'll have to wait and see. Obviously, I'm reserving final judgment until after we've seen all the Scarlet Keys. I'm hoping we'll see this one roll back at least a little bit. I'm fine with them chaining Renfield if they feel like Renfield is just too strong with the new cards. But maybe a +1 or +2 XP instead of +3. +3 really feels like it's just removed from the game. All right, let's move on to Mandy. Now, Mandy, I think, at least for a while, was the strongest investigator in the game and still is one of the stronger ones. And so a lot of people have been wondering if she was going to get tabooed. And in the recent taboo lists, she dodged the bullet, but a lot of the speaker cards that often went into her deck got hit. But no longer. Mandy herself now also has a entry on the taboo list. And it's quite an interesting one, because what they've essentially done is removed the optional deck size effect of her and just made her deck size 50, which also means you always have 3 copies of Occult Evidence in your deck. I think this is a fantastic change. I think this is a very elegant solution to the problem that they had, which is that Mandy at level 30 at 30 deck size was just way too consistent, and her ability just let you set up way too easily. Whereas now, if you have 50 cards in your deck is going to be a lot less consistent, so you're really going to have to rely on Mandy's ability not just to power out more cards, but actually to search deeper to find the cards you need to kind of keep her going. I think this is a great change. I think this is really elegant because it doesn't really functionally change anything about the card. It just takes some of the more broken decks off the table, and I'm really excited to see what kind of 50 card lists people are going to try. The other reason why I'm excited is because it lets one of the other tabooed cards that was often Mandy's partner in crime get a much softer taboo now. Mr. Rook was chained at +4 experience, which I think was painful but also well earned because the card was just completely busted. With Mandy now being a 50 card deck, I think the possibility for Rook exploitation has gone down a bit, and as such they've changed him to be back down to 0 XP, so you can include this card in any deck for 0 XP. Well, any deck for any deck that can take Seeker 0. But instead of a free triggered ability, he is now an action. I think this is a good change. I think part of what made Rook way too strong is his ability to synergize with other fast effects, to have a lot of effects triggering that never took any actions. And so the fact that you now have to spend an action to use Rook's ability slows down those overpowered Seeker decks a lot and helps keep those decks kind of in balance with the rest of the game. I really like it. I think it's putting another powerful tool back in the hands of the players, but in a way that I hope won't break the game. Unfortunately, another Seeker, pair of Seeker allies did get hit. Jeremiah Kirby, the Arctic archaeologist from Edge of the Earth, got changed to be +2 XP, and Janae Beauregard, the Seeker Rogue ally, also got hit to +2 XP. I think in both of these cases, the hits are unfortunately well earned. The problem here being that Jeremiah on its own is probably fine. Getting 3 cards when you play him is very strong, but his forecast and only +1 stat is kind of balanced. The problem really happened when people started using cards like Calling in Favors or the newly revealed Hit and Run to replay Jeremiah over and over again and getting way too much card draw out of him, because it was very easy to set up a deck that had a lot of odds or a lot of evens. Now with the +2 experience, I think he's more in line with someone like Whitten Green, where he gives a nice static boost and a good card draw effect, but you're going to have to build around him a little bit more, and he's going to cost you a little bit of XP. Janae, I think, she was just way too good, right? Yeah, she was expensive to play, but once you got her down, you could just do whatever you wanted, basically. Enemies stopped being a real, big concern. Moving clues around was very powerful, setting up things like hiking boots. She was just very strong. I think that, a lot of people in the chat when this was announced compared her to Michael Lee, which is the Guardian Seeker ally, who also gives 2 static boost and has this kind of small bonus effect, and he's 5 XP. Janae was 3 XP, and I think this is a lot fairer if they're both 5 XP. I think Janae will continue to be a powerful card that people are happy to spend 5 XP on. I don't think she's going anywhere. And then we get to what might be the biggest change in the Taboo lineup for this. I wanted to say this year, but it's just for this list. It's the Lola Haze Taboo. It's the long-anticipated Lola Haze Taboo, because a Lola Haze Taboo was hinted at in the Charlie Kane reveal, and it's quite a wild one. Now, a little bit of context before I actually start talking about the actual Taboo, which is that I recently finished a campaign that included Lola in the team. We were a 3-player team, and Lola was taking the role of kind of boss killer, a little bit of investigating, a little bit of flexing, a little bit of support. And she was fantastic. She was doing a lot. And we lost, over the course of an 8-scenario campaign, I think we lost 1 or 2 cards to her signature the entire time. That's it. 1 or 2 cards, because it was possible to play Lola in such a way that she did not stay in roles that she risked losing a lot of cards on. And so I was kind of skeptical going into this Taboo list. I was worried that a overhaul of Lola might end up being too powerful. But as it turns out, the Taboo is actually very good. So the first thing that they've added is an additional ability. Now, important to note, because I've seen a couple of people misread this on the internet, it's not that her free trigger got replaced with an action. Her free trigger is still there, and it's still limited to once per round. She also gets an action ability to switch her roles, which does not provoke an opportunity, which is just basically a safety valve. If you're in a situation where you were forced to switch your role early on in a round, but now you're wishing that you could switch to something else so you could contribute to something else, you can give up one of your precious actions to make that happen. And I think this is actually kind of exactly what I wanted for Lola, which is that if you're playing Lola, quote unquote, perfectly, this is an action you never want to take, because it's wasting an action essentially. And if you are playing her roles easily or managing her roles well, you don't need it. But if you're in a situation where you messed up, or maybe something came out of nowhere and you had to kind of adapt on the fly, the fact that you now have this option means that you're less likely to get stuck in a situation where you can't do anything and you feel helpless. And I think that was the main thing that they were going for when they came to this Lola Taboo, is avoiding the situations where your game gets ruined because you made one bad decision. There are still punishments for bad decisions, but the punishments are way less harsh. And the main example of this is actually her weakness. So Crisis of Identity has long been known as being one of the most brutal weaknesses in the game, where it discards all cards you control of your current role. Now, as I mentioned, we actually went through an entire campaign where it only took out like 1 or 2 cards, but the reason why that was is that we were able to manage exactly which role Lola was in when she was drawing cards, and made sure to manipulate her deck with cards like Scroll of Secrets to make sure that she would never draw at an inopportune time. You don't have to do that anymore. Now it just reads discard 1 card in your hand or play area from your current role, and then you do the discarding top of your deck, changing your role randomly effect. This actually has a small downside, because what I just mentioned was actually a strategy that probably no longer works, because we were hiding the important events and skills in your hand so that they were safe from Crisis of Identity. Well, those are no longer safe anymore, because you can lose cards out of hand with Crisis of Identity. But on the upside, you can now have multiple assets of the same class in play, and if Crisis hits you, you only lose 1 asset. This enables a massive breadth of decks that I think were completely unplayable before, because you no longer have the risk of losing all your assets. If you're building Lola with a focus on a single class worth of assets, that is now a safe and valid build. I also just want to point out that there are a couple of cards that don't mind getting discarded, right? If you're vibing in survival role, just discard your winging hits or your improvised weapons, and it's actually an upside. Again, I don't think the new Crisis is a straight up buff. In fact, in that deck that we just finished the campaign with, I think it would actually be kind of a nerf, because the deck was built to avoid drawing Crisis at the wrong times. That no longer happens, but we can now build entirely new decks that weren't ever going to work with the previous Crisis, and that's so much better. I think the main thing to take away here is the new Lola isn't much stronger than the old Lola at her best, but she is far less punishing at her worst. If you make a mistake, if you draw a Crisis at a poor time, your game is no longer going to be over. You're still going to have ways of mitigating that, and you can still get ruined by it, right? It's not like if you have 1 rogue asset, you just played your Leo DeLuca, and then you draw Crisis of Identity, you're still losing your Leo unless you have a rogue card kicking around in your hand somewhere. So it's not like the punishment is entirely gone, which is the other thing that I didn't want them to do. But it's like, it's all toned down like 3 notches, which I like, because I like Lola. I think she's a really fun investigator. I think Synergy and a lot of the Edge of the Earth cards did a lot for her, and I'm super excited to hopefully see more players play Lola, because I think she deserves it. And yeah, I think this might be her big comeback. That was everything. That was the new Taboo list. Thank you so much for watching. The Taboo list is always a big shakeup, and it definitely got a lot of excitement and a lot of new deck IDs bouncing around. So I hope you too got inspired by this video to make some new decks. If you have, let me know. Post something in the comments. I'm always excited to see what other people are brewing. I'll be doing the spoiler season recap later this week. I'm hoping to do one before the next spoilers start happening, which should be next week Friday. But as you can probably imagine, this took precedence over getting those 4 cards online. And I also have a super secret recording to get to tonight that hopefully will be a very cool and exciting thing on the channel later, probably next month. Keep an eye out for that one. So once again, thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you until the end of time.